Welcome to Bring Out Your Badass Self, a movement to break your negative thoughts and habits and instead focus on building each other up and encouraging fearless authenticity.
Each week, we will get vulnerable and share experiences alongside our guests and audience. Come rediscover your inner badass self.
Happy birthday!
Thank you.
Oh, I'm so excited. So today's not your birthday, but this weekend you have a significant birthday. I call it significant because of the 4-4. And so
yes,
I had to get you something that just to show your fabulous self.
Oh, I love it. Thank you very much, Sarah. It is fantastic. It goes so well with my bald head. It is just gorgeous. It's gorgeous. 44 and fabulous.
I love it. I love it. Oh, I don't know if you have the other thing, but
I do. Okay, this is actually my favorite part. But this is a bottle of fucks to give, and I am so obsessed with it. It's so great.
So who will be your first fuck to give?
I have no idea. I don't know. There's so many ways I could use that.
I know.
So probably Jenna.
I'm giving you my first fuck.
I'm giving you my first fuck. I give one fuck. That's how many fucks I give right now.
Oh my gosh. So good morning, everyone. We have everybody joining. Good morning, Renee. She said, happy birthday, Kate. And so did Bruce. He said, happy birthday, Kate Badass.
Thank you, Bruce.
Stephanie said, happy early birthday, girl. I hope your celebration is outstanding, just like you.
Aw, thank you.
And Carrie said, have a great birthday.
Thanks, Carrie.
Oh, we have Gail. Happy birthday, Kate. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Kim, good morning, amazing badasses.
Oh.
Eric, good badass morning and happy badass birthday.
Badass birthday. I love it.
And then
Eric, you're the best.
Kim also said, happy early birthday, Kate.
So, thank you.
I think Renee really likes the fucks. So,
yes. I'm going to have to mail fucks around. So I have to write cards. And I am sending you a fuck. Just in case you need to give it.
I love it. I love it.
Well,
I'm also super excited about today's topic. And so, Kate, maybe before our guest joins, could you tell us a little bit about how you know this person?
I will. I'm sorry. I'm laughing at Leslie's comment, though.
Hang on. Let me pull it up. Happy birthday, Kate. Don't be giving out those fucks all willy-nilly.
Okay.
Oh,
yes.
Kim also loves the pink sparkles.
I know. It's perfect. I bet Jenny would like it too with the bling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so our guest, I know her as Deb, but she also is known as Deborah, but never the one in the middle. And so I met Deb in Milwaukee. Oh gosh, it had to have been like 12-ish years ago. Mm-hmm. And we met through a mutual friend. Her name was Tracy Carson. And Tracy had a as we all did at the time, had a real interest in racial justice. Mm-hmm. And she had been doing this program around with different groups that are all a part of this professional association that we were a part of, Tracy and I. And so essentially what it was called Conversation Circles. And there was a curriculum that we used, but it was all about racial injustice. And this was back in, 2011, 10ish maybe.
Mhm.
Maybe Deb has a better memory than I, but we had these conversation circles, and there was a series of like 6 weeks or 8 weeks where we got together, and there was specific curriculum and topics that we were talking about. But the cool thing about it was like 6 white women and 6 Black women, and we were in the room and we were talking about some really intense shit, and it was amazing. It was very eye-opening. It was a life-changing experience, and Tracy had asked Deb to participate and also be our host. So we went every week to Deb's house and had this awesome little den in her basement where we connected and did the curriculum together. And we all kind of fell in love with each other, not in a romantic way, but we all kind of, and we stayed friends, like, so. And there were women in there. There was at least one white woman and then a couple of the Black women who did not have any friends of the opposite race at all.
Mm-hmm.
So prior to going into this conversation circle. So for me, it was a huge opportunity to learn, to more, and to connect, and to have some real conversations with people. So it was very awesome.
I love that. Well,
Yeah.
today our guest speaker, just to give her an introduction, it is Deborah
Yes.
Lukovich. She has a PhD, and she's going to be joining us for a juicy conversation today. And she is the author of Your Soul is Talking, Are You Listening? 5 Steps to Uncovering Your Hidden Purpose. And today we're going to be talking a lot of topics that have to do with that. And then she also has an upcoming memoir, When Sex Meets God, a midlife story that reveals the dramatic and unexpected twists of her own midlife journey. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring Deborah on and let's get things moved around. Perfect. Thank you for
Happy
joining us today.
birthday, Kate.
Thank you, Deb.
That's awesome. Well, Deborah, maybe you could give us a little bit more of a background to you. So tell us a little bit about what it is that you do and maybe some of the things that you're up to today.
Well, everything I'm doing today, I had no idea I'd be doing. So everything I'm doing today is part of my reconstruction after my midlife unraveling. So where everything I thought was true was not true. Everything fell apart. I had to disintegrate and be dismembered. And then out of that, I had to reconstruct myself. So today I am a depth psychology coach. So depth psychology is really the study of the unconscious. And people don't realize that the root of psychology is actually soul and breath.
Mm.
So conventional psychology doesn't talk a lot about soul and breath. They talk a lot about the brain, which ends up being confused with the mind and the ego and all of that. So my psychology is soul psychology. And my framework is helping people explore their unconscious. And even science affirms that up to 90% of who you are, who you think you are, who you're attracted to, your personality quirks, your emotions, all of that is influenced by mysterious unconscious forces. So I help people come into deeper relationship with their unconscious. And then that's part of my larger movement to grow a movement of self-reflecting humans. So I also have a podcast called Dose of Depth, where I inspire people to explore the deeper meaning of ordinary life experiences. And I write a blog, and as you say, and I have conversations on Twitter with those followers. And so that's all part of this new me.
Awesome. Tell us what the old you was. I'm interested, or tell me about the disintegration.
Well, I can say that overall, I am coming into relationship with the feminine. So the feminine not meaning woman, okay, and the masculine not meaning man, but the feminine style of consciousness. So the masculine style of consciousness is linear, is oriented with intellect and reason. 1 + 1 = 2. Accounting would actually be a masculine field. The feminine is meandering, mysterious, patient, strategic, connection, pattern oriented, and relationship oriented. So so like even big picture of the world coming into, we are being sort of forced to reconcile the one-sided masculine with the feminine. And it's not as much about balance as it is about fluidity. When do we need masculine orientation, consciousness, and when do we need so that's sort of my life, is that the first part of my life I lived and I came of age in the 80s, which actually meant that I had to, in order to succeed and be part of business, have a masculine orientation, right, to be successful. Yeah. And that meant I had to leave behind the feminine. And so even women and men need to come into relationship with the wounded feminine, which has been discarded and denigrated. But we also have a wounded masculine, because we honestly don't really know what a healthy masculine is, right? Okay. So you could say that the first part of my life, I was heavily oriented toward the masculine. And then I had my unraveling, which was really mysterious. And it coincided with this irrational calling to study depth psychology. And then I lived all the concepts in real time. Oh my God, I'm in the grip of a complex. And I mean, it was really crazy. I think that was the purpose, actually. That was my calling, right? To experience that and then to be able to help other people find the deeper meaning in what's going on in their life. So now I am building my intuition, and my business has grown organically instead of saying, oh, I'm going to have a business and I plan it out and launch it. I didn't know that these were the things I was going to be doing. So, I would say, like, big picture, that's how I've changed.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find a lot of times people have a particular view of how their life should be. And a lot of that comes from, society, your parents, the things you see. Can you talk a little bit about the things where you were, and then sort of the transition that you went through and the changes that you went through, just to give maybe our audience a little bit more insight to you?
Yeah. I mean, that's so big, right?
It is.
So
maybe starting at the beginning.
Our patterns. So I could do a little education. There's a concept called complexes. So a complex is just our pattern of thinking or behaving or responding to life. And those are rooted, or they originate in our childhood. Why? Because that's the beginning of our life. So it's not a mystery that our, original caregivers have great influence over us, and then our teachers, and then society, and then our church, and all of that stuff. And you can look at our patterns as neutral. They're not good or bad. They're just ours. So you just learn and you repeat what works for you, right? And so whatever patterns you develop, whether it's to survive a traumatic childhood or to just skip through a very joyful childhood, it doesn't matter. But when we get to a point in our life where there's a kind of need to expand, right? So we either want to expand our consciousness. Maybe I was the first in my family to go to college, for example. That's a kind of expansion, right? Or there's a death in the family. That's a forced expansion, right? You need to change, have new consciousness. Then some of those patterns stop working and they get in your way, kind of like a glass ceiling, because you can't really see it. All you sense is like, now you're on a hamster wheel. Everything I thought was true, this worked before, what's wrong? And you actually can't see it. And so sometimes the universe will orchestrate some events that force the issue. So one example a lot of people might be able to relate to is they're in a job that they hate, but they can't leave. They don't know why they can't leave. They keep staying there. Or we know the friends who are like, I hate my job. And you're like, well, just leave. I can't because of the money or whatever it is. Like, there's an obstacle, there's a pattern that's in the way of their ability to choose themselves. So that's an example of how there's something that's trying to expand, but these old patterns of thinking. And then you could say like you could use that language too. So that's an example.
Yeah. I love that. And I also want to just encourage our audience that if you have any questions as Deborah is going through this, feel free to add in your thoughts, your questions as she talks today. And so maybe Deborah, can you tell us a little bit more about maybe the aha moment that led you down the path that you went down in your own life?
Yeah, I would say I was really stubborn. So I didn't have like one aha moment. Although I do start my memoir with, because after all of my unraveling and my calling to go study depth psychology for no purpose, I didn't know why. Very expensive master's PhD program, and it coincided with sort of the beginning of the end of my marriage, and then all sorts of my business crashed, all this stuff. And so I didn't, it was the first time that I pursued something for irrational reasons. Because before that, I worked for the masculine, right? I used my reason, and it was such a powerful complex. And I think I was just so stuck that I just surrendered. So in the moment I surrendered. But then after I went through the unraveling and I was getting my education and I was pursuing my research, which explored women's experience of reconciling sexuality and spirituality. So my midlife unraveling really was driven by this inner battle in me between sexuality and spirituality. And I didn't even know I had those wounds. I didn't even know it until I kind of surrendered to falling apart. And then all this stuff started coming up that took me back. And so I didn't like have one aha moment, but in my memoir, my first chapter starts with, as I looked back in hindsight to find like, when did I get the first twinge? Right? Because I was the kind of person that sort of, I felt like I escaped my childhood and I was on a pursuit for independence. So I was very driven on moving forward. But when I looked back, I think I was 38 and I thought I was like totally writing my own story. So at the peak of feeling like I was in control of my own story, I had this experience where I went on a power walk with my kids. And I'm like, what are those moments where life is in balance? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you're like, whoa, I'm on top of the world. Look out for those moments. I'm on top of the world. And then on the way back, my son's like, Mama, wheel broken. And it was this little thing that we always see on our walk. And I looked at it. And in that moment, I just felt like, like I stop. And then I look up and I see those rays of sunshine, like playing with leaves in the sky. Do you ever have that moment where you look up and it's like this game of peekaboo, the sun and the leaves? And I was just like, wow. And I felt so wonderful. And then heartache. That moment turned into like my heart plunged to my stomach. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't get out of bed happy like I used to. I didn't even realize that something had shifted in me and something had changed. So here I was in the peak of my life. And yet in that moment, I felt heartache, like I had lost a part of myself. So I can look back and see how that was like this first twinge. And then that proceeded to reflecting about what is happiness? Why aren't I happy? Is happy even the real word? And then that took me on a little bit of journey towards meditation and yoga. I didn't know why, but it was like, I guess I began to follow my intuition. So I didn't have a plan or a reason to take yoga. I was just like, I don't know, I feel called to take yoga or body flow. And then I had these moments where I was in tears and I'm like, what is going on? I thought I was so happy. Like, it's really like crushing to think like I'm totally fine. And then a moment later, like, but no, I'm not. I'm lying to myself. You're like, no, I don't want to know this. But then you can't unknow it. So, so that was just the first. And then, it really wasn't a single aha moment, I think, because I was so stubborn. But there were things calling me forward. And then there were health issues. And then it was just like sort of one thing after another. So when this big aha, I did have a huge aha moment then later, years later. And my business had fallen apart and I didn't understand why. And I had this moment of peak manicness. Good. Like I always felt good and up. And I was like planning on how to get my business to $1 million. And I had this team of 6 people. And I had this moment where I was watching myself be brilliant as I shared with them how we were going to get to $1 million. And it was a beautiful mind moment. And they all looked at me like I was a genius and crazy at the same time. And that week, and then the next 2 weeks, my business fell apart. It was terrible experience. 2 people tried to sue me. And I mean, it was terrible. So I went to see a coach and I said, what did I do? What did I do wrong? And that week I went to see the coach, the life transformation coach. My husband's alcohol issue climaxed. And my son, who was in middle school, said he didn't want to live anymore.
Oh my gosh.
So I thought it was about my business. So my aha moment was, wow, this has nothing to do with my business. This has to do with my relationships with my husband, with my family, and ultimately with myself. Mm-hmm. And so I still didn't really know what to do with it, but that was a kind of like, that was a huge aha, that it wasn't about fixing like that. Being manic in my business was a way for me to stay in denial of what was going on in my intimate relationship with my husband, that I did not want to see like the truth of the situation.
Yeah.
I love that. I think a lot of times we were talking about this beforehand. A lot of times we're so busy focusing on controlling our lives that sometimes we don't sit back and really take a moment to breathe and to really take in, as you have been sort of talking about it, as your soul trying to talk to you. I think, and maybe tell us a little bit about, do you think that it was your soul that you weren't listening to, and then all of a sudden it's telling you that, hey, there's another path?
Well, right, because we're busy. Busy can be a defense mechanism against wanting truth, right? So, for me, making the decision or giving myself permission to not feel the same way I did listen to even the way I talk about my husband, that was the hardest decision of my entire life. That was the truth that I didn't want to face. So manicness sounds really great. Like we're up and we're busy and we're purposeful, but sometimes that busyness is just our way of like, yes, being in control and keeping it down. And that's when the soul will help organize events that will force the issue. So what was the second part of your question though?
Yeah, no, it was exactly that. And it has to do with control, and you're listening to your soul. Yeah.
So definitely. So soul is interesting because the realm of soul is the feminine, which is why it can't be pinned down. So soul isn't a thing, but it is a noun, it's a verb, it's an adjective, it's an adverb. We can live in a soulful way. Soul is like a meaning-making function. So if you have the intellect, the mind, and then the body, what is soul? Soul's kind of in between, reconciling the mind and the body. And actually the root of to know or knowing is to relate. So we don't know something with the mind. We only fully know something if we also experience it in an embodied way. So if you just know the text of a book, you don't know, right, the knowledge, unless you also can relate to it through the body. So that's kind of how I talk about soul is, this mysterious, it's the feminine, it's the unknown, it's the mysterious part of it. And so soul, I say, speaks to us through our unconscious, and our unconscious tries to get our attention in many, many ways. Our emotions are a way soul speaks to us. So anxiety is our soul trying to get our attention to explore something. Depression is a way our soul is trying to communicate something to get our attention to explore something. Dreams, probably the number one way I work with my clients on gaining insights from the unconscious is through dream images. And the language of dreams is metaphor and symbolism, which frustrates the ego in the mind. Because the mind, remember, our mind wants to affirm and confirm what it already thinks it knows. It doesn't like the unknown. But out of the unknown that's where innovation and creativity is. But our ego wants to protect us from it. So complexes, what I said about our patterns of thinking and behaving, that is a way our soul is trying to get our attention. Myers-Briggs, a lot of your peeps might be familiar with Myers-Briggs. That's Carl Jung's work. That's based on his psychological types theory. And Carl Jung is one of the founders of depth psychology. So that is actually depth psychology, Myers-Briggs. Now, most people look at it and they just sort of appreciate learning their natural preferences. But the juicy stuff are the parts of you that's in the shadow. Because whatever's in your shadow will come out when you're stressed. During times of stress, that's when those patterns get triggered. And then you're like, who was I just now? Like, I did not mean to yell at you like that. What? I don't understand. You were in the grip of a complex. So film images. So there's a whole field of Jungian film theory. During a lot of my midlife reconstruction, certain types of films help me gain insights personally and then help me relate those insights to the collective, to what's going on in a more universal way, especially superhero films. Alita Battle Angel, Aquaman. Oh my gosh. Into the Woods. So that's another way that I work with my clients, is something might come up and I'll say, oh, I think you might need to see Into the Woods, which is a fantastic movie for everyone to see, because it's really great way to maybe uncover your own parental complexes, because it brings together 5 fairy tales. And what is the commonality in all the fairy tales is the woods. And the woods is the place of transformation. And the place of transformation is a scary place. Oh, that makes me want to talk about the caterpillar butterfly.
Yes.
Go for it.
Should I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we were talking before about how transformation is not like a pleasant experience. That's not transformation then. You can be educating yourself or growing as a leader, but you're doing that from an ego perspective. You're sort of in control of what you're willing to learn. And sometimes you're a little uncomfortable as you put new skills into practice. The transformation is like, oh, it's painful, man. It's suffering. And so the metaphor of the caterpillar turning into the butterfly, when I read about it from a depth psychology perspective, it trashed everything I thought about that beautiful metaphor of how you turn into this beautiful butterfly. Because think about it, the caterpillar for some reason begins to gorge itself. And it gets so big and fat, it can't even move anymore. So then it begins to spin this cocoon. And what people don't realize is that before the butterfly form is created, the caterpillar fully disintegrates. That's a miracle. How does that even happen? It literally disintegrates. Like the phoenix rising, if you're familiar with that sort of.
Yeah.
But this is literal, in nature, the caterpillar disintegrates. Now think about it. Now there's this big butterfly that wants to expand. And what does it have to do? It literally has to scratch its way out of the cocoon to not suffocate.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
It has to survive. In order to survive, it has to claw its way out, and then it can expand its wings. That's psychological transformation.
I mean, that's quite the visual. That's quite the visual there,
right?
To think
Death
about.
and rebirth.
Yeah. I mean, and when you think about a lot of times when I'm going to relate this back to even the business. We're dealing with change management. We're dealing with people changing software and things like that. But even in your own life or things like that, when you think about change, people typically are thinking pain, are thinking struggling. And so it's an interesting metaphor to just think about change in general in your life. And typically when you have changed the most, it's because of the pain or the trauma or the things that you finally faced and realized.
Right.
Yeah. And And we kind of I mean, a lot of people don't like to say midlife crisis. And I'm like, why not, man? It does feel like a crisis when everything you thought was true isn't true. Why are we afraid of that word? Because in our society, we're about like being happy. What is it? Happy is like conditional. Peace and joy are sort of core ways that you can feel even when you're experiencing difficulty, right? Like you can do it in a peaceful way. And happiness is so like superficial. So all of our potentials are in our shadow. And so we are experts at our unique journey, right? We are experts in our trauma. We are experts in our experience of being a human being, especially the challenging parts of it. And so because of that, we are also a unique expression of the universal experience of being human, right? So we are unique individuals within a collective. So our transformation is needed by humanity. So a lot of us don't realize how important our own self-reflection is and our own psychological transformation. We just look at our life, our family. But as you are self-reflecting and coming into deeper relationship with yourself, you are automatically holding space for others that you don't know that cannot. Or you are having an impact on an energy shift with other people by your own transformation. And you might not be able to see it. In most cases, you can't really see it, but there is like the shift in energy. And when you begin to take ownership of your journey and your own psychology, then you actually, what that means is you're taking back what you're projecting onto other people and you're relieving them of the burden to either validate your existence or whatever it is. But you have to take it back. And then you liberate them too. Especially your children. This happens in families. What the parents don't explore in themselves ends up being projected onto especially one child who often is seen as the difficult child or the black sheep. They are carrying everybody else's dysfunction that they're not able to look at in themselves. And then everybody's like, oh, they're the problem child. The problem child is the one absorbing everybody else's dysfunction.
Wow.
Interesting. Yeah. This is intense.
And fun, but it's fun.
Oh, yeah.
I love it.
So I'm going to pull up a question. She thinks that you've pretty much already answered it, but I thought it might be good to go ahead and pull it up. So Carrie had said, thanks for being here. Question: if you don't listen to your soul or internal voice, do you think the universe starts doing things to make it harder and harder to ignore and thus course correct your life?
Yes. And it's not like course correcting. It's not like, here, go here. But it's like, well, Carl Jung has this theory of the self, capital S. So the self in us is our higher moral authority. It is this part of us that sort of has a blueprint, and it is sort of prompting us, but it's not trying to make certain choices or decisions or steer you. It really is just about prompting you to unfold in whatever way that you unfold. And if you're a spiritual person, I can't remember what her name is, another Jungian analyst that looks at the self as the bridge to the divine. So as you come into deeper relationship with your unconscious, you are getting more in touch with self, which is your bridge then to the collective and to divine intelligence or the quantum realm or God or nature or whatever that bigger principle is for you. So the answer is absolutely yes. So, it's all about like, just keep growing. And growing is like, it's managing this tension constantly between this and that in order to find this transcendent third position. And the transcendent third is always an increase in consciousness. And so as we increase our consciousness, then the collective is forced to increase consciousness. And you can think about women, right? All the stuff that happened in the 80s that ushered in, like it was this momentum. There was anger released from women, the collective into. It wasn't until 1983 that in all 50 states, it became illegal for a husband to rape his wife. There was Thelma and Louise driving off the cliff, choosing death over oppression. There was Violence Against Women Act. So that's an example of like all the individual consciousness raising then coalesced at the collective level. And then we had this ushering in of new attitudes about women. So that process is happening all the time. So that's how important every individual is in their self-reflection.
How do you know when you're raising your consciousness?
Well,
Like-
I think aha moments are a good way to think about it, where you're like, so, Kate, during conversation circles, like I thought I knew a lot because I was always interested in social justice issues, but I learned what I didn't know before. And since George Floyd, think about, for example, a book came out called Nice Racism. 10 years ago, that would have been like, what is that? That's not a thing. But now we understand the subtlety. Systemic racism. 25 years ago, most people probably, even though there's still denial among some people, most people wouldn't even be able to see that. So that's an example of consciousness raising. Consciousness raising about yourself is, if you have been the kind of person that, you really rely on other people's validation of you. And then and then you finally have this experience where you're like, fuck that person. Like,
I'm enough. Right.
That's very powerful. You can't force that. That's really hard to go from needing the validation to like not needing the validation. It's easier said than done. Sure. So, but doing the work and exploring why do I feel this way? Why do I need that? Why do I feel bad when I get called into the office by the boss? Every time I sweat, like, what is that about? It's constant asking, like, what and why and for what and for what purpose? So then what purpose is the consciousness raising for? It really is for you to ultimately contribute to human consciousness raising.
Yeah. And one of the things that you had said previously when we spoke is that when you feel triggered, it's really it's an opportunity to explore. And
yes, it's an invitation. Oh, so this is where you can have fun. You can either be devastated by this stuff, but I found my sense of humor when I was falling apart. It was my survival coping mechanism for midlife unraveling. Because I was very much, I'm a recovering perfectionist, a recovering control freak, not controlling of others or the external world, but of myself. So any situation, I'd be like, okay, how do I approach this? How do I approach this? Right. In a way, because I was brave, but terrified at the same time, but I had courage. Right. But in order to do the scary things, I had to have like the psychological approach to it. So, yeah.
So do you think that sometimes that gets masked as like strategy?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. A strategy. Yes. In fact, I say that's how I pursued my life. The first part of my life was like a business plan. Right. Yeah. So triggering is a wonderful invitation to explore. Now, here's the thing. Let's say the other person that triggers you, this is not to excuse any bad behavior.
Right.
Because that person might be an ass.
Right.
Objectively speaking. But if you're more than annoyed, then there's something to explore in you. If you're just like, dude, do you see what you're doing there? But you're like, you're sweating and your heart is beating, like that is about you then. That's your invitation to explore something. And the thing that you might need to explore is actually how to communicate back to that person, right? In a way that you're not defensive, but in a way where you try to communicate that behavior was not cool. But if you're triggered, you can't really do that in a way that doesn't cause defensiveness on either party. So it's an invitation. So next time somebody really pisses you off, just go journal about it.
Just get curious. You're saying get curious about what's going on with you.
Thank you for saying that. Like those are my mantras. Like be curious and linger. Linger in the emotion. Be curious about what it's trying to communicate. and slow it down and try to sort, because every little incident is so complex. There's a lot going on. And when and we also, this is another education term, projection. We relate and we come to know ourselves through others. They're always mirroring something back. So every single freaking encounter you have with another human being is actually, there's projection going on. Projection's fine, but they're mirroring back something about ourselves, either something, and especially like when you admire people or when you admire / cringe. Oh, that's good. Because what you're cringing at is a kind of self-judgment that you can't be like that, but you're like, oh man, that's so bitchy. But if you also admire that person, it's your unconscious saying, but you need to be a little bit more like that. Not like them, but maybe you need to bring out your inner bitchiness to advocate for yourself. But it feels so wrong. It feels immoral to be that way. So it's just so juicy. Juicy. That's my other word, juicy.
I love that. And so a couple of things that I want to sort of circle back that you talked about as far as the collective, the collective whole. I really like that. And a lot of times I also find that a lot of times people go on a journey, and part of that journey may not be quite the way society considers normal. And I put it in quotes. But I have found that for myself, I didn't really give a shit what society thought, just because that was the journey that I needed to go through in exploring whatever it was. Maybe can you talk a little bit about why it is that people within society, I feel like, constantly sort of judge sometimes the journey that people take? Is it about, I guess I'm curious about the person that feels judged, and then also the people that sometimes then do judge. Maybe I'm just curious about exploring this particular topic.
Oh, well, this is a great time to bring in sort of the clash that's happening right now. Bottom line, that's the patriarchal way. So patriarchy today is not really about men and women. And women don't realize that men carry a patriarchal wound too. All right. So the wound that women carry is being oppressed, subordinate, denigrated, even murdered in the past for being a woman, right? Because they hold the feminine. The feminine is not woman, but when patriarchy emerged, the feminine was denigrated and then projected upon literal women's bodies and nature. So nature is the feminine. So the denigration of nature and the environment is very wrapped up in rescuing. We're not only rescuing the planet, we're rescuing the feminine. So the masculine is not bad. A one-sided valuing of the masculine is what is bad, a warped sense of masculine, which is what we call toxic masculinity. But now the problem is that a lot of people have adapted that, and many women are projecting that onto all men. We need to get away from that. Patriarchy is really a system, and it's a system that is driven by ranking and hierarchy and comparison, and capitalism without guardrails is a form of a one-sided masculine. It values profit, which is, what does that even mean, over human life. And we can see that. So think about it. We're all running around controlled by the need to compare ourselves to others, the punching down of others. So we feel bad, and we all do it, even if we're not violent about it. We are all to make ourselves feel better. So we need to see this in ourselves. Now, men, their patriarchal wound is, can you imagine? Am I a man or am I a real man? Or am I, like, even within men, you're not a real man. You're gay. You're feminine, as if that's bad, right? Like, why can't men just wear dresses, like walking, like what? Come on. What's the deal?
Who gives a shit?
Yeah. So a lot of it is like this really big system under which we live. And that's why the self-reflection about your own wound is important, but also that you can honor the wound of others. so that there is not this comparison of suffering,
Right.
which happens sometimes even within, like, there's racism. So there's that wound. And then there's, the gender wound. Oh, my wound's more suffering than
Woundy.
That's feeding into patriarchy. So whenever we divide and allow ourselves to be divided and turn against each other, all we do is just enrich those that are grifting off of it, basically, because it's profitable and that feeds into it. So I mean, so it's really complex. So what do you do as an individual? When you explore your own unconscious and you come into deeper relationship with yourself, you end up feeling more compassion for yourself. Self-compassion is a requirement to actually have empathy for others. So you might think you're all generous, but you might not really be. You might be using generosity as a way to make yourself feel better. That's not generous. That's not altruism. Oh, I give and then I feel good about. No. Or you say good morning to somebody and you're annoyed when they don't say good morning back. That's not being kind.
Right.
Can you say good morning and not judge another person for not returning your good morning?
Right.
That's what we want to move to. So why are you annoyed when somebody doesn't say good morning back? Explore in myself. Why do I need that person? Right. So, I mean, it's quite a journey, self-exploration, but you will realize that you have compassion for yourself, and that allow you to have more compassion for your mother, because we all have a mother wound and a father wound. Right. And so we go from seeing them as gods and goddesses, and they need to be perfect and provide these things. And they might have done bad things. My mother was mean to me, but then I found my ancestral wound. And then I was like, oh, no wonder they're all mean, the women in my family, because the men were jerks, right? Why were they jerks? Well, they had their own suffering, that whole thing. So we all have these wounds that we're carrying around. And so we explore ourselves. That allows us to have compassion for ourselves. Then we can hold the wound of men, the patriarchal wound, and then we can come together to hold the wound, the bigger wound, the collective wound. But we can't do it unless we can honor each other's wounds.
Love that.
Did that answer your question?
It did.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so do you identify wounds as like just pain, and past suffering,
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's really subjective, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the reason I say like everyone has a mother wound is because the mother also carries the feminine, right? So we all, like, the whole world has a mother wound and a father wound, right? Because there was something projected onto literal men and women, so so the wound is really big and it's collective, but then we also have our individual wounds too. So, you get to define wound any way you want. I like to name my complexes. So I have a complex, I call it my feeling trapped complex, because when I was born, my mom was 19 when she got pregnant with me. She came from a very abused background. And at one point I came to understand through my own self-exploration that the role that I played in the family, being the firstborn, was to prove to her she was a better mother than her mother. Now, how would she know she's a better mother than her mother? How would she judge that? By my behavior.
Yeah.
So when my behavior wasn't good, she internalized that as her own failing. And then, of course, she projected that onto me, because I was not proving that she was she was a better mother than her mother, like by leaps and bounds. But so that's my particular wound. So anyway, so for me, in my past life regression, being in the womb was a very suffocating place. So I felt that sort of projection to prove, to constantly adapt and not hurt her feelings, right? So now I take that out into the world. And I realize that one of the reasons I'm an entrepreneur is I feel trapped in groups. I feel trapped in a corporate culture. I feel like I can't breathe. And in a movie theater, I have to sit on the aisle. In a plane, I have to sit on the aisle. I need an escape route. And so I've had to like explore that. And also there's a light and dark side to all complexes. So there's a light side to being an entrepreneur. I have freedom. So even certain people's urges and desires and tendencies to be an entrepreneur versus something else, that's rooted in very early experiences, not only personal, but we have an ancestral psychic DNA. And Carl Jung would say in our psychic DNA, we carry all the psychic experience of the whole history of humanity. Just like our biological DNA carries the whole history of biology, we carry the same thing in our psychic DNA. So there's also parts of us that we can't explain by our personal experience because there's archetypal things going on as well. So sometimes we get used and swept up by the archetypal forces who want to use us in their own way. They'll have their way with us. If you get swept up in a rational love affair, or you just have to do something. It's stupid and you crash and burn, but you had to do it. Then the archetypes are involved. And so, yeah, we can't judge then, right? Judging other people for that is just, they're mirroring back something to us. So our judgment is an invitation to explore what are we really afraid of in our own lives.
So pretty much, so like triggers are an opportunity to explore, judgments.
Yeah.
Like, so it's kind of like things that cause like extreme or more extreme emotions. Or like,
good, positive or negative.
Right.
What makes you feel swept up? I love the feeling of being swept up. It's creative. It leads to creativity. And also the negative emotions, once processed and explored, they usually end up creating something. And it could be creating a new insight, deepening a relationship, more intimacy, or creating a book, writing a book, or whatever. So negative emotions serve a purpose as well.
Oh yeah. If you had to give advice to your 20-year-old self, what would that be?
So I like to answer this question with nothing. I wouldn't give my 20-year-old self any advice because I wouldn't be me then. Like, I had to have the experiences that I had to gain the insights about myself and humanity and my role in humanity that I had.
Yeah.
Right. So I could say, after being married for 24 years, like, don't marry that man at 20.
Right.
But no, there was an unconscious agenda. I loved that man, but I didn't realize until my marriage fell apart that my secondary unconscious agenda was that he was a safe place for me. After a lot of turmoil in my sexual and relationship experiences. And what I knew about this man was that he was kind and would always respect me. I needed that. And then at some point, I guess it was time to fall apart and to move on to a different relationship. So every relationship we have, and I have a whole framework about how to find the deeper meaning in relationships called the 3 Ps. But every encounter you have and every relationship has this unconscious purpose that you're not aware of. And we relate through projections. So I talked about that. If we don't understand what's being mirrored back, then we grow to resent each other. And sometimes one person can explore and the other person just can't. So that means that person outgrows the relationship and they must leave the relationship. That's not a failure. Because if you cling to permanence, that this relationship, this marriage must last, then you usually sacrifice honesty. Because you're afraid if you're honest, that it's going to, you just have this fear. You create this whole story. And there's a paradox with that actually the more honest you are, which means difficult conversations, the more likely your relationship is to grow and you do become more intimate and it grows in a healthy way. The less honest you are, the less happy, the less intimate, the relationship is, and you may stay together but not be fulfilled, that sort of thing. So there's this paradox that if you can let go of the need for a relationship to last, you're more likely to have it last.
Mm.
I love that.
So so I wouldn't, so that's kind of the long answer to my question. No.
I love it.
Just to fully live.
That's radical acceptance, right? Just to like in and of itself. When you were just speaking now, I want to like this invitation that you have based on like experiences, whether you're judging or you're triggered, right? I often struggle with like knowing the time to be curious and also knowing the time to just fucking let it go. So how, like, and you talked a little bit about yoga and like, I'm sure you meditate, so tell me, like, what are the signs from your intuition or your conscious that you like need to dig further versus just fucking let it go?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's what the capacity to self-reflect is, the ability to hold these things and not know. Right. So to manage, that is a perfect example right there. You're like, well, I could let it go, or I could explore more. Maybe something new emerges, right? Is there value in exploring it more? Maybe there's not. I don't know. So that is the journey, is being able to not have to know necessarily what the right thing is to do, but maybe you can tell, like you actually can ask your intuition, okay, I'm looking at two choices here. Should I do this or should I do this? If you put your hand on your chest and be present, you'll get an answer.
And you'll know. So just like you'll know.
You will. And if you don't want to listen, okay, fine. Just like there's a consequence, and then you explore some more. So we like always have this fear of like doing the right thing. Like even when I was falling apart, I was reading books about how to end a marriage in the right way. So I was all about like collaborative divorce, and every fantasy I had about how it could go to minimize the damage to our children. And we could eventually be this, new extended family, and you bring your new wife and I had the fantasy. It was trashed every turn because my former husband, who I care about a lot, no, he wasn't going for it at all. So I sort of had to give up on doing things the right way. How do I unravel in the right way? That's ridiculous. But that's me. That's one of my complexes. The good girl if I don't know what to do, I'm tortured. If I know what to do, but it's really, really super hard, that's easy. I can do anything hard if I know it's the right thing to do. So that's why, coming to the realization that I wanted to end my marriage, it was a process of getting there. Self-exploration, explore. And then one day I was like, well, it seems obvious what to do now. And that point is different for everybody. Right. So there's not even really an answer to your question.
And sometimes it's that, as Carrie was asking, there's the knock on the door, but sometimes we're also not listening to ourselves, and therefore, we'll continue to explore other things while we don't make that particular decision.
And there might be purpose in that, right?
Exactly.
And I just love the reminder, Deb, that the hard conversations create more intimacy and more honesty if you're able to do those.
Well, right, and this is the thing right now that we're in such danger of, and all the climaxing of the hate and the push towards consciousness raising is like Carol Gilligan wrote a book called Why Patriarchy Persists. And she sees it as a defense mechanism, a psychological defense mechanism, because patriarchy is the opposite of vulnerability. Right. So I'm sure your listeners are familiar with Brene Brown as well. So, vulnerability is the key to strong connections with other human beings. And right now, that is more terrifying for certain people than ever. They don't but people aren't aware of it. So I have another tool, and actually on my website, you can get download a PDF of this, and it's a template for having a difficult conversation, and it's from Crucial Conversations. So some people might be familiar with that book. It came out in 2004. It has like 9 principles of crucial conversations. All you need is the first one. It's called Start with Heart. And then I added my own beginning to it, I statements, and then I want Start with Heart. And I actually teach people how to prepare, how to use this tool to have conversations that result in clearly expressing what you want to express in a way that doesn't cause defensiveness on either side. So people can just download that for free if they want to try it out. And then the 3 Ps framework is on my blog and on my podcast.
Yeah, if we could get links to those, I'd love to be able to add that. I am going to add in here for our viewers the first chapter to your book of Your Soul is Talking. Are you listening? The 5 steps to uncovering your hidden purpose. And then maybe just a little bit of a sneak peek of what's coming in your memoir when sex meets God, or when God meets sex. Which way is it?
It's the juicy part of my midlife story that wasn't really needed in my dissertation, right? So I didn't know what I was going to be researching. It just kept finding me. And I was like, no, are you kidding me? I don't want to do this. So again, my research explored women's experience of reconciling sexuality and spirituality. And I suspect many women who came of age in the 80s and even after really might have this sort of need to reconcile these wounds that they have. So my own experience, when I finally realized I was going to be getting divorced, I had this psychological, like, all this stuff started coming up from my unconscious. And it was all these complexes around men and sex and boundaries, and the universe, myself, orchestrated all sorts of odd situations that forced me to really explore, because now my safety net was gone psychologically. Now I was out there. It was so fascinating. And then I had really interesting experiences with, like, I was all serious again with my new job at Playworks and working on my research and making peace for my kids after divorce and managing my husband's, addiction and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden this guy came up to me at the Tiki Bar. That's where I used to study. And he walked away and I was like, oh, what just happened? Oh man, there's that sex and romance stuff. No, I don't want that right now. And so after that, I got swept up in a lot of desire got unleashed, and I had to find places for it to go. And I ended up dating a series of men that were 17 years younger than me. They were all like 33 years old, and I was 50. And I was like, I'm not doing this on purpose. Seriously, I'm not. But what is going on here? What is being projected back to me? And then I got swept up in a very ironic romance. And I eventually end up calling him my prison boyfriend. So there's a little twist in there for that. And all the dating helped me with my complexes around coming into healthier relationship with my body and sexuality. Then where spirituality comes in, where God comes in, is the irony of the other romance. My first post-divorce relationship was that he was a fundamentalist Christian. And so during that 22 months, I had really interesting experiences of sexuality and spirituality coming together that included like spiritual orgasms. So it's a juicy story, but it also like tracks with sort of this process of unraveling and reconstruction and new consciousness raising. And out of that, the butterfly, right, came this new sense of purpose and this new meaning in my life. And in a way that I'm contributing because I really am very passionate about growing this movement of self-reflecting humans. So that's the end game, is that you circle back to relate to the collective, to the community. So it's all the juicy stuff that was not needed in my dissertation.
I love that. So when will that be released?
I'm really working on like finalizing it right now.
Okay.
I would say probably October, November.
Okay.
So
Cool.
if you subscribe on my website, you can subscribe, DeborahLukovich.com, and then you'll get a newsletter. And in the newsletter is always like, here's my new podcast episode, lots of free content. I'm all about just like sharing this. And then of course, people can hire me as a depth psychology coach as well. But I really want to get all of this stories that are inspiring, amusing. My stories, use my own vulnerable experience to give people the courage to embrace their own vulnerability. They're amusing, they're entertaining. So anyway, so they'll get updates. And I'm still looking for book launch members. So people who would like to be involved in reading an early copy of the memoir and then being part of helping me. Oh, yay. And I've got 85 right now and I'm trying to get to 100. So I could use 15 more people. Yeah.
I'll do it. Yeah. I would love
Oh, thank you.
I think we might have some audience members. Someone said, I can't wait to read this.
Oh,
So, yeah. So I put your website address.
Is it Deb Lukovich or
No,
Deborah?
Deborah.
Okay, good.
DEBORAH Lukovich, LUKOVICH.com. And then everything and all my socials are on the top. So if you're on Twitter, I've got like 4,700 followers that I share reflection questions, and we have engagement around that, and Instagram and YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. So all of my I just recently started. Also, my podcast interviews are on YouTube. So there's a video version of them as well.
Great. We just had 4 people that said they would volunteer. So
so they should shoot me an email. dlukovich@gmail.com. Yay. Thank you.
Perfect. We'll add that as well. And so that's ultimately our last question. I thought you ended it great as far as like the gift of how you're giving back. And so I'm excited that people will be able to join and learn a little bit more about that memoir, and then also check out things on your website. And so, Deborah, I could talk to you.
Can I add one more thing?
Absolutely.
I just want to add one more thing. Anybody who's like, you don't have to be stuck or in crisis to need depth psychology coaching. You just have to be curious. And I offer to anybody a 30-minute free exploratory chat. So if anybody's like, hey, will you work this dream with me? And I also do depth psychology coaching via email. And it's a more affordable way to like communicate through emailing. So anyway, so I just want to make sure that everybody knows that you can have a 30-minute free chat, and you'll learn a lot just in that chat.
Nice.
So, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I could talk to you all day. And so I think I might be taking you up on meeting with you for the 30 minutes and maybe even more. So
You're juicy. You're juicy. I know.
Yes. Yes. I knew. I told Sarah, I said, you and Deb are going to get along extremely well. Didn't I tell you that, Sarah? And I don't even know who she is right now. I've just been watching her LinkedIn as she's evolved. And I know she's getting into sex and she's getting into all this other cool stuff.
I love talking about sex.
Yeah.
Well, I love talking about, well, that's a whole other conversation.
I know.
Like, the deeper meaning of sexual energy is not always about literal sex.
That sounds like another episode.
Yes. Totally. You'll have to come back to this.
So thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great conversation. I could just sit here and listen to you all day. And I can already see, from other people, exceptional program. Huge thanks. Thank you so much. Great conversation. And then, great episode. So deep and intricate. So
wonderful.
So
thank you.
Great. And so thank you so much for joining us. Kate, do you want to end us today?
Yes.
Happy birthday, girl.
Yes. Thank you. Go on and be your badass selves. I'm going to have a badass birthday. Let this conversation and our movement fuel your Friday, people. We love you all, and we are excited to see you next week. as well.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.